So it's made out of recycled drilling equipment, entirely made out of locally available materials. This filled kitchen runs off-grid with any flammable material. It cooks on these wood stoves to produce large amounts of food without existing infrastructure, without having to rely on fossil fuel supply chains, without having to rely on existing electricity and so forth. There's missile strikes occasionally near the kitchen. There's blackouts across the whole city. So it's very rare that you can rely on the infrastructure well enough to provide food in these contexts. This kitchen is unique in its ability to continue providing food throughout these circumstances. It had begun for many years through first feeding forest festivals, then in disaster relief in the southeast United States, serving people at the border of Mexico, refugees who were coming up from Central America, and then finally in Ukraine currently, getting ready for the second winter of the war. It's been set up there for about a year, so we have everything in place necessary to continue serving food off into the future. It's primarily serving women and children and the elderly and disabled people who are fleeing the war. All of the men have been conscripted already into the military. So those are the people who remain and are moving westward. The Altruist Relief Kitchen is a project to provide the basic necessities, food, water, shelter, medical sanitation, in the most difficult situations in the world. Natural disasters, famine, floods, war, in a radically sustainable, transparent, and efficient manner. So it's radically sustainable in the sense that it can be sustained. It can provide all of the energy necessary for cooking and purifying water and the heat during blizzards from any available flammable material. It also is made out of cheap, easily available or recycled local materials. It is radically efficient in the sense that it can be broken down, moved into extremely remote locations, set up for the people who perhaps didn't receive services before the calamities ensued. But its best evidence of its efficiency is that we produced 100,000 meals in about 7 or 8 months at 33 cents a meal, which is dozens of times cheaper than the largest humanitarian aid organizations in the world, with the largest economy of scale. So already with the particular configuration that this project has taken on, it's doing something quite remarkable. The transparency is a harder thing to see necessarily. As far as I can tell, it's the only transparent humanitarian organization, down to showing photographs of cash and anonymous donations that come in, all the way through videos of the procedures and the things that are taking place and the accomplishments of the organization, down to photographs of every individual receipt corresponding to all of the expenses and the who, what, where, when, why of those receipts being posted, along with videos explaining all of the elements that a person could be curious about in relation to the finances. It is a revolutionary transformation and transparency in just that way. One of its capacities, this kitchen, is a highly collapsible ability to break everything down into a very small portion. These are 4 of the stoves. You can picture them being carried into a remote location just to provide sterile water, if not food, and the rest of the kitchen can be broken down completely by hand with winches and pulleys, transported on carts into very remote, inaccessible places where people needed those primary services before the calamities ensued. Also, as is being developed in Turkey on the border of Syria, a very large capacity. These 50-foot wide field tents can be connected together such that with 6 of these stoves running, in this case, 250-liter pots, we can get closer to 10,000 meal maximum capacity, set up in a refugee camp where distribution constraints are removed, that capacity is more capable. We've served now at this point 130,000 meals this year, which is a 10 or 12 or 15-fold increase over its previous lifetime, depending on how you look at it. And with the 3 kitchens under construction, each making just over 1,000 meals a day, we can do another 10 or 12-fold increase, maybe this coming year, maybe the next year, but it has an incredible trajectory to provide relief around the world. So I hope you could read between the lines that this project is redesigning, reinventing, reimagining the fabric of humanitarian aid from scratch, from first principles, to build the base layer, a robust base layer that can then go on to do any project. If you want to plant 1 million trees in a remote location, you have to support 1,000 people to do it. Schools and hospitals are primarily food, water, shelter, sanitation, etc. It can go on to do any project, it can anywhere and be anything with this robust base layer. So often in these presentations, this is the point where I would go off and start talking about how it has been set up on the border of Syria or on the border of Guatemala, things we've done in the past. And instead I will talk a little bit about the ideas that inspire this project. What compassion and caring and interest and intrigue, these are the qualities that we most value about ourselves. It's the thing that we identify with as being our vital spark. And they're all feelings. They're incredible faculties that we possess. Altruism is an action, and it's an important distinction on some level. Newton said that we're in a clockwork, hard deterministic universe of mechanisms bumping into each other, and that through the process of these mechanisms bumping into each other, we have the illusion of hope or interest. We have the illusion of passion. I think that it is exactly wrong. If you look at the matter, it isn't there. If you look at the things, the objects, down to their fundamental level, the atoms don't exist. They're these infinitesimally small proton at the center of an imaginary cloud that when you investigate it is 3 quarks buzzing around and they themselves are packets of energy. It's bullshit. It doesn't make sense. The thing that's real is that spark, that inherent passionate interest and intrigue. That's the thing that's real. So imagine, now you hear from the stream, help. Someone says help from the stream. That feeling is real. But to respond to it by feeling at that person, compassion, empathy, it's not an appropriate response. You have to use that feeling as a catalyst for the action-oriented engagement of altruism to actually extract that person from the river or try. Because that intent, that is the thing that keeps this whole thing healthy. So we are, through each one of these actions, we are creating ripples off into the future that grow with intensity as they move out from us. So we're creating these shock waves with everything that we say and everything that we do and everything that we do not do and that we do not say. We're creating ripples that move out into the future, and they grow with intensity as they do, such that the nature of consciousness and the world is a fundamentally different place 100 years from now, 100 million years from now, because of the way that we behave in this current moment, especially during this particular bottleneck. The tiniest action amplifies. It does not dissipate. The deterioration of the wider ecosystem in the global commons requires for the altruists to become organized and work in concert to do incredible things that we would not be able to do individually. So the emergence of these massive altruistic institutions in the 1900s is one of the pivotal, transformational events in the consciousness of the Earth that this currently dominant organism is deciding to work together to create positive change on an unbelievable scale that these individual institutions that are as large in some cases as countries have apprehended the mechanisms of military to drop food on places where only before had there been explosives, such that they can influence on an incredibly wide scale the unfoldment of life on Earth. Not just for humans, but for specific species, for certain ecosystems. There's super powerful groups of people who are focusing on how to make that positive change. That's the only mechanism at our disposal at this point. There's always been small groups of altruists teaching children and conducting medical facilities to help out. That required an expansion in the middle of the 1900s such that it was able to remedy some of these much larger issues. Now, that being said, these humanitarian aid organizations built into them, instilled into their fabric some fundamental flaws as the people and the time was in the 1900s. It's using the mechanism of civilization, certainly, to enact this function. It's acting like an immune system, like the self-defense mechanism of the Earth is the altruists working together to create positive change, action-oriented engagement to create positive change, using the circulatory system of civilization, because civilization is orienting itself like an organism. In what way? Why is civilization orienting itself like an organism with a circulatory system that moves blood cells in and out of the city, pumping resources, pumping ideas into and out of these heart centers, just like a biological organism would do? It has a nervous system to move impulses along, to communicate ideas, and it stores these ideas in vast distributed memories such that it can remember the course of what it's doing and make course corrections. Why is civilization orienting itself like an organism? It's because it is being created, it is an aspect of the development of this spherical entity that we compose and comprise and are on and creating with each moment. This entity is apparently creating civilization as a stage of its maturity, as a development of its consciousness. Now, it's no surprise to us that the Earth is an organism, that it's an entity, but to delve a little bit into the details of what that means, what it implies, and how that works is helpful for the key actions that are necessary in this transition. Beginning 650 million years ago, the Earth was a proto-consciousness. It was just a shell, an egg, a seed of consciousness. It was essentially potential. It was frozen completely solid from pole to pole. There was no land exposed. You would be forgiven for thinking you were flying by Enceladus or Europa. There was no consciousness exhibited in the sense that consciousness of the Earth is the sum total of the experiences of all of the beings. So in that same way, like Mars is a skeleton of a planet. It is the thing that maybe there's bacteria, but it's the skeleton of a consciousness. The actual consciousness that we're referring to here is the embodiment, the sum total of all of the organism, the sum total of the sentience on the surface of this ball of lava. That entity is the thing in question having this experience. We should forget that the galaxy itself is an organism, that it is a cell within a larger organism, and that the rocks and fire and dust are components of it. It's very, very difficult for us to try to understand the consciousness of the galaxy. Forget that I mentioned that. We are instead concerned within this presentation that the rocks are not embodied with the kind of consciousness that we are familiar with, that we are fond of. And neither was the Earth 650 million years ago. It began to hatch by, let's say, 632 million years ago. It began to open up and emerge. Life was still slime at this point. It was goo. And the best of it was film on rocks. And it had the inherent emergent property of consciousness at that point, that it is on some level experiencing temperature and sensation. But not until the Ediacaran about 600 million years ago did macro structures form, not quite plant, not quite animal, that were swaying and taking in the movement of the fluid firmament. So this is an emergent moment where the consciousness is pure sensation. The consciousness of this entity constitutes pure sensation. Then things began to move around with pursuit, with intent, with particularity, until, with the explosion of the Cambrians 542 million years ago, about 500 million years ago, there was an explosion all at once of experience taking place. This entity began to experience itself on a profound level almost all at once. Predation and interest and sex and movement and engagement, all of these things emerged 500 million years ago, kind of from scratch on some level. And the nature of these creatures that had taken form then, you can picture the sum total of them. That is the consciousness of this entity, the sum total experiences of all of these beings. An incredible abundance filling the oceans, unbelievable diversity filling the oceans all at once. But more than anything, consciousness in a localized, articulate manner, perceiving the glowing of the moon, perceiving each other, seeing what was going on, maybe not having a really deep engagement about what was going on, but certainly perceiving all over the world, all at once. The consciousness of the Earth had emerged into an era of perception. It was confined almost entirely to the oceans. The Earth itself, the land, was barren. It was a desert. Nothing yet had come to it. It was still in its developmental phase until 420 million years ago. Vast columnar forests of Prototaxides mushrooms, huge dozen-foot-tall mushrooms covering the land, building the soil such that other things could emerge. 360 million years ago, by the Carboniferous, rainforests, true rainforests, had emerged. And so you picture at this moment in the Carboniferous that these rainforests are containing just a vast diversity of consciousness, and that the experience of these consciousnesses is sharp and piercing, like they have an intent. They have, anyone with chickens registers how much consciousness is in this tiny little reptilian being. And that is the thing that we saw emerge in the Carboniferous 360 million years ago. By this point, 320 million years ago, very soon into that, altruism emerged. Like, these beings were taking care of their young. They cared for the world outside of themselves. They, in the same way that a chicken obviously cares for its babies in some complex way, these creatures had taken that on too. By the Permian, the monsters like Dimetrodon cared for the existence of their young and would protect them. The Earth, on some level, was caring and compassionate. It moved from perception and awareness into an intentionality, a caring for the existence. So that the dinosaurs represent about a 300 million year swath of time where this was developing, it was coming online, both the perception and the caring, the altruism, the intention had developed quite fully. obviously punctuated as it was by an asteroid, but I need to draw attention to just like the carnage and the destruction and the punctuation of the asteroid kind of ruining all of these things, and we can feel like terrible about it. We can want it to not have been this way. And really we should notice this is what planets do in the void. Given 10 billion years, this is what planets do. Sometimes in the right conditions, they create these organisms. So I try, I feel ways about it, but I'm trying to notice what's happening beyond that as well. By 50 million years ago, the Earth started to mammal, which is to say that individual localized consciousness, localized intelligence in one being became of central importance to the spherical entity of the ecosystem, as demonstrated by doing it everywhere simultaneously. So there's an inherent consciousness of the forest where you pick a leaf and it may just sit there, but the forest itself embodies a consciousness. The Earth found importance in and began following the direction of embodying that consciousness in individual organisms to a profound degree, such that they would not just see the glowing of the moon, but they would feel a melancholy and nostalgia about its existence. The proto-mastodon is exemplifying this hyperencephalization where the consciousness organ, expansion for the ability, the consciousness capacity was of primary importance to the spherical ecosystem at this point. Protocetus exemplified on some level the communication and societal structure that would emerge as primary importance to this spherical entity that we are and compose and comprise and create, until the most advanced animal ever to walk the face of the earth emerged. The African elephant. It was, as far as we can tell, the most advanced organism ever on the surface of the earth. Absolute brain size is really a good metric for the capacity of consciousness. We can see that we have, these little brains that some of us are good and some of us are not, but we have a capacity for consciousness. The capacity of consciousness of the African elephant, 1.5 gallon brain, maybe 1.25. Unlike anything that the world had ever done before. Just absolutely of central importance to this entity, that it create the experience to remember and care and perceive on a long time horizon. And the sauropods show us that you only need a rat size or perhaps cat size brain to run a very large body. It's a misconception to say that large animals needed a large brain. Take a rat-sized portion of the brain out of the elephant, the rest of it is consciousness. It's doing something very intense, something incredible. But on a level that's hard to fathom, twice that brain size, about 2.5 to 3 gallons, the sperm whale, seen here dreaming in unison, in formation, communicate across the entire ocean on dozens of frequencies, with thousands of individuals across thousands of miles, across millions of years. The capacity for communication and visualization and empathy and understanding embodied in the sperm whales is unimaginable to us. We only get little glimpses of what it's doing with that consciousness, but the Earth is certainly creating these sentient beings and embodying them, and seen in sum total this moment where it had reached this apex of consciousness, where it had creatures like the pachyderms and the cetaceans to feel deeply and passionately and interestedly in the existence of nature and time and space. That was a thing that the universe was doing through the Earth. There's no other way to parse it. A whale doesn't exist in the void. We don't either. We are aspects of the consciousness and perception of the spherical ecosystem. and hominids happened. They weren't the best at consciousness, but they could manifest, specifically with their focus in their hands, they could manifest objects and narratives. They were the best at producing objects and narratives. And they all did it simultaneously. All over the world, they all began creating civilization at the same time. In the same way that the world mammaled and that the world created hyper-individual consciousness, it began creating civilization. Everywhere, simultaneously, all the hominids were working on just the basics of manifesting objects and narratives. All of them were doing it so conspicuously, so simultaneously, that it can't really be seen as anything other than a developmental stage of the consciousness of the earth that it felt compelled to civilization in some way at that moment. Until the most advanced hominid ever to walk the earth finally emerged, the Neanderthals. As far as we can tell, they had the largest brain of any of the hominids. They had robust culture and art and music, and they rowed boats across the rivers, and they lived in equilibrium with the ecosystem for 200,000 years. Probably the best sign of their advancement, to retain the technology and culture necessary to live in equilibrium for 200,000 years. They were the apex of the hominids. And together with these other sentiences that I had mentioned, all over the world, emerging out of the forest, this moment, a couple 100,000 years ago perhaps, it represents the densest concentration of hyper-amplified sentience that the world has experienced. Looking at it as like per square 100 miles, how much sentience is embodied in that strip of the earth. This was the maximum magnitude that the earth was capable of achieving, apparently, of this just hyper-accentuated sentience. And then Homo sapiens happened. We were particularly good at societies and passing down ideas, remembering concepts and objects and procedures and narratives through deep time. And so we began creating all of these artifacts as fast as we could and everywhere simultaneously. It's important to notice, unconnected to each other, we began creating civilization, the Homo sapiens, simultaneously across the whole world. It's hard to see it as anything other than a developmental stage in the consciousness of the earth on some level. The characteristics of the civilization were so similar everywhere. The time frame of its development was so similar that we were able to manifest the internal workings of our narrative into the universe down to the point of creating, in this case, a super collider that can peer into the fabric of space and time itself. It is a thing that we're doing, yes. No one person can conceive of it. Nobody can really explain it very well. They're certainly not doing it themselves. It's a thing that the planet is doing. The consciousness of the spherical ecosystem is going through a transformation that it desires, wants, instincts, something. It is perceiving the universe. It went from just feeling nostalgia and melancholy about the images, about the sensations, about the interrelationship of each other. It went from interrelationship of the beings on the planet to perceiving the wider universe, to trying to understand the place that it is. It is sending out spores, in a way, into the cosmos to visit the other worlds, to peer into the cosmos itself. It is interested in where it came from and how it got here. It's investigating the nature of reality. That's the reason that it's creating civilization. It's investigating the nature of reality. That's one of the reasons. It wants to know what's happening. It's curious. It has peered out at the galaxy, and it has seen that it is part of a wider entity, and it is engaging with it on some very peculiar way. Super rapidly, it's creating this subset organism oriented like a biological system to conduct this perception. And like the dinosaurs, I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it. I think it is happening too fast. It is happening improperly. It is not an appropriate method. I don't have to agree with it. It's not my place to agree with it. I can hate the dinosaurs for being carnage for so long, but it is one of the things the planets do. Whether or not I want it to, certainly, this is one of the things that these entities take on. It's creating civilization partially as a mechanism for understanding its place in the universe, where it came from. It's looking at deep time. It's looking at the edge of the universe. It's looking at the atoms. It's peering into the fabric of what this is. Its inherent vital spark that we each embody with our passion, with our interest. It is creating a way to mature. We are behaving as the self-defense mechanism of the sentience underlying it, because it may not survive this. It's done poorly in the past. It's not certainly going to work. It is important to this entity that it create this development for some reason. And it's not necessarily for us to know or to question, but it is for us to be the self-defense mechanism, the white blood cells, the immune function of the spherical ecosystem. Now, of course, this whole entity is just a cell in a larger organism. On some level, we can't understand this larger organism. It's out of our reach. Like the galaxy is having some sort of experience as an entity that we can't personify, we can't fully understand it in the way that we can understand the Earth, because we're so intimately connected to the sentient beings. We spend time with them, so we can get a sense of what the Earth is doing. It's a little beyond us what the life cycle is of these larger cells. But like our inhibition about the development of civilization and the dinosaurs, we are blood cells in the circulatory system of a larger organism. It's not our place to necessarily know. We don't have to understand why the bird is migrating across the ocean. We can see that it is on some level. We can see that it is. It's our job to just go into the heart again. We are a cell in the creature. Our job is to just go into the heart again. It seems on some level, beyond understanding what's happening in the wider universe, it seems as though it's getting ready to leave. I don't have to understand why, but the stellar era is, say, 7, 10, 15 trillion years. It's in the low digits of trillion years, the time in which there will be stars. Everything is temporary, don't worry, but this point where there are stars possible, that is where this life is really flourishing. Whatever is happening on this larger galactic level, that's what's taking place. Within that, say 10 trillion years, this organism I just described over this past 600 million years is occupying a tiny, tiny fraction of the very beginning of that life cycle. A tiny fraction, about that much of the 10 trillion years that it can mature. In another 600 million years, this organism will not be able to live here. There won't be enough carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, the sun will be too bright, the oceans will have gotten too hot. It's a 1.2 billion year time horizon that this organism can live here. And it feels, on some level that I don't have to agree with, that it's going to migrate eventually, probably in a couple 100 million years, not right away, but it's in that process. It's sending out spores. It seems to me, I don't know how else to interpret what I see. It will die here with the sun right away. This is a great place to start, and it's not a very good place to live for a very long time. Very near to us, there's red dwarfs like Barnard's star that were built at the beginning of the universe and will still be around at the very end of the stellar era. Those are much better places to live. This was the best place to begin. We could assume that there are many places like this, where it is beginning, where it is going through this similar life cycle. It is one of the things that galaxies do. It is not just doing it here, but it is important on some level that it mature. If it dies in the first second of its infancy, it cannot reach full maturity. On some level, it's perceiving, waking up, understanding, and we're seeing the very, very first slivers of what will be unimaginable once it grows, once the full development of this organism is allowed to flourish. I'm not concerned with any of that. Like, that's so far beyond me. That's interesting. I love perceiving some of these things. That's not for me to participate in. I'm concerned with the quality of sentience. The quality of sentience is of central importance because this is such a precarious event that's taking place. The quality of sentience is of absolute primary importance to us. We don't need to know what the migrating albatross is trying to accomplish. We just move into the heart center again, bring in a little more energy. In this case, protecting that vital spark, the passion and the interest, the excitement, the awareness, that is the thing that we are particularly concentrating on. We're each doing it in some way. A part of this self-defense mechanism, a part of the protection of the sentience, we're each embodying it. I'm doing it in a particular way of trying to remedy the idea of humanitarian aid on some way that it could be a more sophisticated tool for repairing the degradation of the global commons. It's just one facet. Other people are teachers. There are some brilliant mystic seekers who are captivating with the English language and can convey poetry in a way that inspires us. That is another aspect of the self-defense mechanism of this ecosystem. We are all working together. We don't need to worry about the larger picture. It's sentience inherently that we are concerned with. So this is 1 year to the day since my mother died. She was a poet. It was very cold that day. And so I dug the waist-deep snow away from the ground and chopped into it with an axe to break apart the frozen clumps, and then dug into the earth until it became warm. I dug down to the warmth and wrapped her frozen body in blankets in the snow under the moonlight, lit candles, and carried her down into the warm earth with my lovely daughter Karma. And then I came back up out of the warm earth, and I flew to the other side of the world in a blizzard, into an active war zone to try to finish this project to prepare what had been a year in the making. So my mother died on the full moon. She died on this day of the year. The full moon was several days later. I buried her under the full moon to candlelight with all of the found objects that she had found significant along the trail, sticks and rocks and flecks of seaweed, thousands of natural found objects that she found significance in. I included them in with her. And then on the next full moon in February with my daughter Karma, we visited, as we had intended to do for quite a long time, we visited Turkey on the day of hundreds of earthquakes that damaged the place more than it had been perhaps in recorded memory. We showed up on the day of the full moon within hours of these earthquakes that devastated the country, so we began working together to build another of these humanitarian kitchens on the border of Syria. We lived together in the tent camps. We had intended to go to see ancient ruins. We instead went to live in modern ruins, in this case during Ramadan, to participate. Then on the following full moon, I, by coincidence, returned to Ukraine, and that was the day that the kitchens started serving food for the first time. That third full moon of this year, it began operating. It was quite a project to get going, but then once it did, it hasn't stopped yet. We've made perhaps 135,000 meals now in Ukraine. So thank you for thinking about this project for a minute, and in the context of why. No one's ever asked why I'm doing this project. It's always how and what is happening. So I appreciate this opportunity. I just flew up here for one day to be here to speak with you. I was born in Homer recently, and I will do what I can. Thank you so much thank you so much. I really do appreciate this opportunity.
So we have some, I'm sure people have a lot of questions, so this would be a good time to ask those questions.
Wonderful, thank you, yeah.
There are so many people here in the United States of America that are food insecure. When are you going to do that here?
We did. I started here. So I did disaster relief for many years.
Where?
All over the Southeast. There was hurricanes and floods, and we'd set up and provide basic necessities. I'd overlay the map of destruction from, say, a hurricane with the map of inherent poverty to go to the places that needed food at first. Built 20,000 pounds of gear on 2 buses, moved them to different places, set up as a refugee camp on the southern border. It was in some level some sort of preparation for this event happening around the Black Sea, and there was some catalyzing mechanism by building the whole thing from scratch. I worked on it for 12 years in the US, building the whole thing completely from scratch. In a foreign language on the opposite side of the world, in a different unit of currency and measurement that was actually the thing that made it work. So I don't know if it could have happened otherwise, and now I'm trying to make it in as many places as possible. Yes?
You make a wonderful PhD presentation. Where has it been presented and published?
I've never said this before. This is the only place that I've ever said any of this.
Why?
No one is ever curious about the why the project happens. I usually say how and what we do. So I describe the project.
Why are you doing it?
I described the methods of going into a war zone and building a kitchen out of recycled, easily available common materials, and then cooking food on wood stoves. And that's interesting too, and it's on the website. There's videos. But this is the first time I've ever been invited to say why.
Well, you haven't told us exactly why. What motivated you? Where did you come from, and when did you wake up to go into that? I mean,
Oh man,
quite a,
where did I come from?
a journey.
Well, you know, this entity, right? Like we came from this entity. We are aspects and constituents of this organism, this giant spherical ecosystem that's having its an experience to do in my own life. I have a very interesting life because of it. So
I think what she meant was, when was the spark that lit your fire that said, okay, this is what I want to do?
I think that's probably the best answer I could give. Yes.
So, you said you work with the Hindu Krishna people, the Hindu people.
Yeah.
Did you get an initial? When did you start working with them?
It's been an incredible partnership with the Krishnas in Ukraine. It's been really the thing that made it possible. One woman, Aloka in particular, who is herself like such a high quality person that she is in ways that she couldn't admit, the reason that it's very functional there, and she was the person that brought in a lot of these other Krishna people. So really part of my job is to find people like her that are able to facilitate each of these projects.